Welcome to the GEC Podcast, a ministry of Grace Episcopal Church, Sheboygan, Wisconsin. For more information and a schedule of our services, please visit gracesheboygan.com.
I'm Deacon Michelle Whitford from Grace Church in Sheboygan. I'm going to be chatting with Mary Lynn Adams. She is a deacon at St. Anne's in De Pere. We're going to be talking about Benedictine Spirituality. Mary Lynn, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. As Michelle said, I am a deacon at St. Anne's Episcopal Church. I am also an oblate of Holy Wisdom Monastery. This is a women's ecumenical Benedictine monastery near Madison, Wisconsin. I lived there for about 2.5 years, and I have been in love with Benedictine spirituality since I first started learning about it about 10 years ago. I find that it has an awful lot to say about how we live our lives in the world today.
What does oblate mean?
An oblate is someone who is associated with a monastery. They usually spend a year in training where they will go to the monastery once a month and learn about the Rule of Benedict and how to apply it to their lives. And they then try their best to apply the Rule of Benedict to their lives in the world. And meanwhile, continue to return to the monastery occasionally for retreats and seminars and workshops.
So is that like a nun wannabe? Is that working towards becoming a nun?
Well, it is not being a nun or a brother or a sister. There is not a lifetime profession. That is a vocation that is reserved for very few people who can do that. However, there is a lot about the monastic life that is very attractive and that can be lived out in the world. And so an oblate does that. They take that spirituality, they take the rule, and they bring it out into the world and apply it to their lives as best they can.
Okay. So tell me, who is Benedict?
Benedict was a man who lived in 6th century Italy. When he was a young man, he went to Rome to study and was totally disgusted with what he saw there. Rome was falling apart. There were pockets of violence across the empire. The economy was falling apart, and the gap between the rich and the poor was getting bigger and bigger. The gap between powerful and powerless was getting bigger and bigger. The world was pretty much in a mess as he knew it. And so he retreated and lived for a hermit for a few years, was then asked to come and be an abbot to a monastery. And he founded several monasteries after that, and based on his experience with that, he wrote what is called the Rule of Benedict. And the Rule of Benedict is a set of instructions, you might say, on how a group of people can live together and support one another in seeking God.
Okay, is it a long rule?
It's actually very short. The interpretation of this rule, however, fills many books over many ages since he wrote the rule, and it has been interpreted in various ways in various times over the last 1,500 years, and yet the rule itself has stayed as the core of monasticism.
What do you mean the core of monasticism? All monastic orders, or how does that work?
Not all monastic orders, although they all draw on his rule to some extent. As with any human organization, it's gone through cycles. And so you've had monasteries based on the Rule of Benedict, starting with Benedict himself. And as they would grow larger and richer and more powerful, there would be people who would say, wait a minute, this isn't really how the rule is supposed to be interpreted. So they would start some sort of a reform movement to go back to the original rule. Over hundreds of years, those would get bigger and more powerful, and again, more reformers would come through. So over 1,500 years, it's kind of cycled through this boom and bust. But it is the basis of most religious orders in some fashion.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, Benedictines are across the world, and in both Roman Catholic and Anglican and Episcopal, and there are some ecumenical monasteries now. So it's something that was written in such a way that it had these core principles, and it was very humane, and so it survived through all this time.
Mm-hmm. Do most of Benedictine people who live out the rule, do most of them live in monasteries?
That's a difficult one to answer. There are Benedictine monasteries, and these would be places where people live, work, and play, and pretty much stay within the monastery itself.
Mm-hmm.
There have been Benedictines, particularly in certain missionary periods. For example, as the United States was settled, and as the United States grew, Benedictines would go out and away from the monastery to set up schools and orphanages and hospitals and that sort of thing. And at least among the women, they would tend to be in small groups to begin with, and perhaps after being in a place for a while would be able to actually set up a monastery.
Oh.
So, yes and no.
Okay.
And then there are also those people who are oblates who are not professed, but who use Benedictine spirituality in their everyday life.
Mm-hmm. Tell me, what is in the rule what is in the rule, and why does it intrigue you, and why is it something that you practice?
Well, you don't have enough time for me to fully explain all that. So let me give you some highlights.
Okay, that'd be great.
One thing that I really like about the rule is that it is so humane. It understands that people have all different levels of abilities and levels of spirituality and levels of discipline, and it really makes provision for all those different levels. At the same time, it encourages and challenges those who have certain strengths. It makes allowances for and supports those who have certain weaknesses.
So you don't have to do it perfectly to begin with?
Exactly. It understands that people are not perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And in being written to allow a group of people to stay together in community for their lifetimes, it took account of that and makes provisions for all different levels.
Mm-hmm.
It's principles of dealing with one another, with interpersonal relationships. As a business person, I see this as being a manual for human resource management.
Oh.
It's, how do you encourage people to be the best that they can be?
Mm-hmm.
How do you use discipline not to punish, but to help people grow?
Mm-hmm.
How do you deal with issues between people where things aren't going well? And
Mm-hmm.
how do you reconcile that? So that's something that I find intriguing. I have seen that in action, and I know that it works in the workplace.
Mm-hmm.
The balance in life is something that Benedictine spirituality supports.
What do you mean balance?
Well, if you look at how the day is laid out in the monastery, there's time for work, there's time for prayer, there's time for leisure, there's time for creative work and study. And the idea is that you balance these out throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout the year, so that each one of those things becomes significant and important and a way of praising God in its own,
mm-hmm.
without being overwhelmed by any one thing.
Mm-hmm.
Prayer is supposed to be short and frequent. And so you go in, some monasteries 3 times a day, sometimes 5, sometimes 7. And you go in and maybe it's a 15-minute prayer. But that's enough to keep you going till the next time you go to pray.
Mm-hmm.
Work is very important. It's even if you are elderly, if you are frail, you should still have some sort of work to do, but not so much that you get overwhelmed. You have enough to fill that time slot in the day, but you don't get into this thing that we are prone to do of working 50, 60, 70 hours a week. You need to balance that. Leisure is an important part of the day. Benedict believed that you needed to have time just to appreciate God's creation and to mull over whatever, you read in Scripture that day. So leisure is an important part of every day.
That seems counterintuitive to what the stereotype of monks and nuns being austere and, the sternness of the stereotype. So to talk about leisure as part of it sounds very different to me.
Right, and there are religious orders, and especially during the previous to this century, there were some orders that were very ascetic, and you were to be miserable and you were to suffer because our Lord suffered, and therefore that's what you needed to do. That was not part of Benedict's spirituality. He also does not have a vow of poverty. A lot of religious orders have a vow of poverty.
Mm-hmm.
Benedict does not. What he says is that all things are to be held in common. Nobody owns anything themselves. It all belongs to the community. And he wanted to be sure that everybody had enough. He felt that you could not seek God, you could not pray, you could not grow closer to God if you were busy worrying about how hungry you were, or how cold you were, or how miserable you were.
Mm-hmm.
So he wanted everybody to have enough.
It does sound very humane.
Yes. Yeah.
So there's prayer, there's work, there's leisure. How does that work in your everyday life?
I try. Now I'm retired, and so that has made the idea of leading a balanced life much easier.
Yeah.
As I look back at, when I was working, and I was a chief financial officer of a small business, and so I worked a lot of hours. And I look back on that and think, I probably could have built more balance into that and been better off. But there it is. So now I try to maintain a balance of prayer and work, my work at church. Study is an important part of the Benedictine way of life, so I have time to do that now and try to keep up on that. I try to treat people the way he had, according to his principles of community living, try to incorporate that into my interpersonal interactions.
Mm-hmm.
His way of prayer, I think I've integrated that fairly well into my own prayer life. There's always more work to be done.
What does your prayer life look like? What kind of prayers? Is it devotionals? Is it extemporaneous prayers? How do you pray?
All those ways. I have a little bit more formal prayer in the morning, and that also includes some study. I always have one or two books that I'm reading on spirituality or on some church subject. I do meditation 3 or 4 times a week. I will do meditation in the chapel for about 20 minutes. In the evening, I will have more informal prayer. I also try to be very mindful about everything that I'm doing during the day, that everything I do is prayer.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm washing the dishes, that's a form of prayer.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm sitting and just enjoying God's creation, that's a form of prayer. And I try to be very mindful of that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
When I am staying at the monastery, then I join the community for their prayer at St. Gregory's Abbey in Michigan. They do prayer 7 times a day, and I really like that, and that's something I really enjoy. But that's something you do in community.
Okay, so your prayer life, you talked about being retired. What kind of work do you do to keep that part in balance?
Oh, well, as a deacon, there is always as much work at church to be done as I am willing to do.
Yes, I understand that.
You understand that. And so that's the work portion of my life now, is what I do up at church.
Okay. And what do you do for leisure?
Oh, I knit and I read and yes, I love to do puzzles on the computer.
Uh-huh.
All sorts of puzzle games and logic games. Yeah, that's kind of it.
So, kind of normal.
Kind of normal, yeah.
So you can be kind of a normal person and follow the Rule of Benedict.
Yes. That's what I like about it.
Okay.
You know, and really, I think when people start studying the rule, and I've got to say, don't just pick up the Rule of Benedict and read that. It was written 1,500 years ago, and there's some things in there that's very off-putting because it was designed for people 1,500 years ago, where, you know, capital punishment was, or corporal punishment was just the way you did things. Use a good commentary, especially Joan Chittister, Esther DeWall, which explains what the rule is.
Okay.
But what I wanted to say is, as you study the rule, you'll start recognizing all this stuff and saying, well, yeah, that's good. And yes, that makes sense. And yeah, I could incorporate that in my life.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing to me that, you know, he captured all these principles so long ago.
That still translate today.
And yeah, right.
Well, that's good advice to have a commentary next to the rules, so you get kind of a modern take on things, so it fits into our daily life as we live it in 2015. Exactly.
And just as an example, if you look at, he has a whole course of discipline. And as you read that, at first you might think it's rather harsh. I mean, at one point, people are not supposed to speak to, you know, the monk that's being disciplined. But when you read the commentary, you see that what he was doing was saying, if the monk has done something to separate himself from the community so that he requires disciplining, then give him a taste of what it's like to be separated from the community.
Oh.
But meanwhile, there's this older monk who's supposed to be working with him, trying to bring him back.
Uh-huh.
And so, you know, most modern companies have 3 levels of discipline before you get fired.
Mm-hmm.
I think Benedict has got like 7 or 8 levels before somebody would actually be kicked out of the monastery. And even then, he says, and welcome them back if they want to come back.
Well, that sounds like the gospel.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Imagine that.
Imagine that.
Well, this is all very intriguing, and I thank you for your insight. Are there any final things you would like to say, to add to our conversation?
I would really encourage people to read something about Benedictine spirituality to get a better idea of what it's about. Joan Chittister has written a lot of things. Margaret Gunther, Esther DeWall.
Do you have titles?
Oh, you know, if you go by the author,
you find more.
Anything they write is good.
Okay.
You can also go online and learn a lot about Benedictine spirituality. Monasteries are known for their hospitality. So if you want to take a overnight and be a guest at a monastery, you will be welcomed and given very nice quarters, and you will receive as much help as you want, or if you want to be left alone, you'll be left alone.
Will they try to recruit you?
Hmm?
Will they try to recruit you?
No.
So they won't try to put you in a habit if you go there?
No, and you can leave anytime you want.
Okay. Because those are concerns I would, are they going to proselytize me and try to make me be one of them when I'm just trying to search something out?
No, they have, to provide a place of retreat is very much a charism of Benedictine monasteries. The fees are very, very reasonable. They welcome you to join them in prayer, and they will, assist you with how to use their prayer books. Usually the grounds are beautiful. Certainly at Holy Wisdom Monastery, they're restoring prairie, and the grounds are beautiful. And most monasteries seem to be in beautiful places. So I would encourage people to try it out.
Well, that's very good news, and something that I don't think lots of people know.
I don't think they do either. I gave a talk to Learning in Retirement about monasteries, and I had 2 people come up and said they didn't realize that monasteries still existed.
Mm-hmm. And very often they think they're only Roman Catholic monasteries,
right.
That other denominations don't have them.
Right. The Anglican Church is very heavily based in Benedictine spirituality. Benedictinism was very important in England right from the start of being of missionaries coming there to bring Christianity there. So the Anglican Church is pretty well steeped in Benedictine spirituality.
I didn't know that. That's very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate your time and willingness to talk to me about this. I would be happy to hear what you had to say. This has been enlightening and kind of comforting to know that there's a way of living in balance with prayer and work, and leisure can be part of it. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for your time, and we'll talk soon.
Okay, well, thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to the GEC podcast. Please visit gracesheboygan.com, where you can learn more about us, find a schedule of our services, and hear more podcasts.